Whispers, and today I'm going to take a look at one of my old books. This is from 1890 and it is about Bloomsbury and St Giles in London. I have to be a bit careful with it because with it being quite old it's starting to fall apart a little bit. It's by somebody called Clinch. It's got decorative top here. So the chapter I thought we could look at is about the British Museum, and I've actually just popped a little paintbrush here as a bookmark. So it's chapter 10. The British Museum. Let's have a read. This magnificent establishment of which the nation has such good reason to be proud is by reason of its extent and wide sphere of usefulness and the grandeur of its priceless collections, by far the most important institution of its kind in the kingdom, and the most important object for the student and sightseer in Bloomsbury. There is a peculiar appropriateness in the fate which led to the selection of Bloomsbury as the site for the British Museum, inasmuch as many of its most valuable contents and its chief original founder were for many years associated with that parish. Sir Hans Sloane, an eminent physician, naturalist and benefactor to learning, was born at Killalea, County Down, April 16th, 1660. His father, Alexander Sloane, was a native of Scotland, but removed to Ireland and was collector of the taxes for the county of Down, both before and after the Irish Rebellion. The early years of Hans Sloane, until he was nearly 16 years of age, were spent in natural history studies, a subject of which he was passionately fond, and to which he devoted great and careful attention. When, in his 16th year, an illness of a serious nature confined him to his room for 3 years, and necessitated the relinquishment of his favourite studies. Upon the recovery of his health, he studied chemistry and the preliminary branches of physic. He also studied his favourite science of botany at Chelsea Garden, which was then but just established by the Druggists' Company, and at that early period of his life he made the acquaintance of Boyle and Ray. 4 years after, he attended the lectures of D'Ornfort and Duvernay at Paris, and he is supposed to have taken his degree in medicine at Montpellier or Orange. He returned to England, and on January the 21st, 1685, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. In 1687, he entered the College of Physicians, yet so great was his ardour for natural science that he relinquished the flattering prospects in order to pursue his more congenial studies. He embarked for Jamaica as physician to the Duke of Albemarle in 1687, and made so good use of his short stay there, and at the other places where his vessel called distinction of the highest estimation in science, and the greater at that time, as the French nation was at war with England, and the Queen's consent was necessary to the acceptance of it. The commencement of a museum of Dr. Sloane's collections was made at an early date, and numerous gifts from friends rapidly augmented its contents. His residence in Bloomsbury Square was crowded with specimens and curiosities. In the year 1725, the collection comprised 26,200 articles of natural history, exclusive of 200 volumes of preserved plants. He began in February 1741 to remove his library and museum as desired a ticket was submitted every night to the principal librarian, or, in his absence, to another officer of the museum, who, if he considered the parties admissible, was to direct the porter to deliver tickets to them according to their said request, on their applying a second time for the said tickets, observing, however, that not more than 10 tickets were delivered for each time of admission. As has already been stated, only a limited time, 3 hours in all, was allowed for the inspection of the museum, and the party was taken in charge by a different officer for each of the 3 departments into which the museum was at that time divided. The following minute of the trustees of the British Museum, dated June the 21st, 1759, gives some rather amusing information as to an officer's duty in the first year of the museum's history. And this is a quote: "The committee think proper to add that the requiring the attendance of the officers during the whole 6 hours that the museum is kept open is not a wanton or useless piece of severity, as the 2 vacant hours, if it is not thought too great a burden upon the officers, might very usefully be employed by them in better ranging the several collections, especially in the department of manuscripts, and preparing catalogues for publication, which last the committee thinks so necessary a work that till it is performed the several collections can be but imperfectly useful to the public." In point of fact, says Fagin in his Life of Panizzi, these librarians were ciceroni. In 1802, after 43 years, 3 attendants were appointed to relieve the under and assistant librarians from the daily duty of showing the museum, and their salaries were advanced. But it does not appear, says the report of 1807, that the under or assistant librarians received any particular injunctions to execute the several duties proposed for them, nor does it appear by their subsequent conduct that they understood themselves to be under any specific duties of that description. So that, continues the report, the public has been, and is, at an annual expense of above £2,000 a year, for the mere purpose of showing the house to strangers and providing an attendant upon the reading room. In the first synopsis satisfactory feature in the history of the British Museum from its very first establishment is the number and value of the accessions to its stores which it has received in the form of donations. From the commencement, valuable objects and collections of every description and from every part of the globe were poured in upon it until at the beginning of this century it was so overfilled that the antiquities gained by the Egyptian expedition in 1801 and the Townley marbles bought in 1805 lay scarcely sheltered from rain in the museum yards, and a gallery was erected for both collections in 1807. A new gallery was also built to receive the magnificent library of George III, which was given to the nation in 1823. This wing, which may be said to be the very first part built of the present British Museum, was ready for the reception of the Royal Library in 1828. This magnificent apartment, forming the first part of the projected building, is what is generally known as the King's Library. Parliament having voted supplies, the work of building the new museum went on gradually. In the year 1845, old Montague House had entirely disappeared. The new building was finished in 1847. It was designed by Sir Robert Smirke, R.A., and is pronounced by universal verdict not unworthy of the noble collection within its walls. The building, as Sir Robert Smirke designed it, was a hollow square in the Grecian Ionic order. Its principal front, facing Great Russell Street, presents an imposing columnar facade, 370 feet in length. The residences of the chief officers of the establishment are situated on each side of the museum. It was not long before better accommodation was found to be necessary for the library, which was increasing, both in readers and books, at a rapid rate. The quadrangular plot of ground enclosed by the four sides of the museum afforded the necessary space for a new building for the library and a large reading room. How well that space has been utilised, and how admirable are all the arrangements of the large circular reading room, are well known to the many thousands of students who make use of its advantages from time to time. Mr. afterwards Sir Anthony Panizzi, whose name is very intimately associated with the British Museum, was keeper of the department of printed books when the proposal was made to build a new library, and he sketched out a plan for the new building, the centre of which was to be the circular reading room and the four angles and other available spaces of ground round it to be occupied by a building, chiefly of bricks, iron and glass, specially calculated for the safe storage and easy accessibility of the rich bibliographical treasures which it was designed to receive. Mr. Panizzi's plan was adopted by Parliament, which voted the first grant of money for the new building in 1854, and the foundations of it were commenced in May, and the first brick laid in September in the same year. In less than 3 years, the great work was completed, the new reading room being entirely finished by the end of April 1857. The opening ceremony took place on May the 2nd, 1857, a grand breakfast being given at the British Museum in honour of the occasion. Professor Owen, Lord Banmure, Lord and Lady John Russell, Sir George and Lady Grey, Earl Spencer, the Duke of Somerset, the Bishop of London, and Mrs. Tate. His Royal Highness the Prince Consort would have been present had it not been unavoidably prevented by the death of the Duchess of Gloucester. Everything considered, perhaps it was the proudest day in the history of the British Museum. The new buildings met with universal approval from the distinguished visitors who inspected them and who breakfasted in the central reading room, using the catalogue desks as tables. To Panizzi is due the praise not only of suggesting the idea of the new reading room and library, upon which the architect Sidney Smirke, R.A., worked out his plans, but also of overseeing the details of the work as the structure progressed towards completion. This successful issue brought compliments and congratulations from all quarters, and it was almost universally admitted that Panizzi had planned the most elegant, convenient, and perfect reading room which was possible upon the space at his command. The reading room, which contains ample accommodation for more than 300 readers, is constructed principally of iron, with brick arches between the main ribs, and is roofed over by a magnificent dome of copper, 106 feet in height and 140 feet in diameter. The dome is formed into two separate spherical and concentric air chambers, extending over the whole surface, one between the external covering and brick vaulting, the object being the equalization of temperature during extremes of heat and cold out of doors. The other chamber between the brick vaulting and the internal visible surface being intended to carry off the vitiated air from the reading room. This ventilation is effected through apertures in the soffits of the windows and partly by others at the top of the dome. The bad air passing through outlets provided around the lantern. In size, the dome is second only to the Pantheon of Rome. Two galleries run around the walls on the inside of this room, giving access, including those books within reach from the floor of the room, to 60,000 volumes. There are about 25 miles of shelves in the library, and nearly all this almost incredible space is occupied by books. The whole of the quadrangle is not occupied by the new library and reading room, there being unavoidably a clear interval of from partitions extend in lines from the centre of the room to its circumference, and on both sides of each partition are seats for 8 readers. Every seat is simply furnished with pens, ink, blotting pad, and racks for books. All around the reading room, within reach of the readers, there is a magnificent selection of standard books of reference and the works of authors in greatest request. These books, like all the books throughout the British Museum Library, are arranged upon the shelves with reference to their subject, irrespectively of language or date. There is an excellent key plan to the books in the reading room, from which it is easy at a glance to see where any particular book is likely to be found. In addition to that, there is a special catalogue for these books, arranged according to subject as well as according to author. The reader is at liberty to consult all these volumes at his pleasure, with the very reasonable condition that he replace each volume as soon as he may have finished with it. The books which are reached from the 2 circular galleries, which run all around the room, are such as are most often in request. A special catalogue of them, too, has been prepared. The great advantage of having them within the reading room is that they are thus accessible in the winter evenings, long after the general library is in complete darkness. In order to consult these books in the galleries of the reading room, and also in the general library, trustees of the British Museum. The claim of the trustees to the landed property was disputed, and by a decree in the Vice-Chancellor's Court, July 1826, disallowed, the device to the museum being pronounced to be invalid as within the provisions of the Statute of Mortmain. The net sum of upwards of £65,000, however, came into the possession of the British Museum in the year 1879, and it came very opportunely, for at that time government was spending large sums of money on a new building at South Kensington for the natural history departments, and was altogether inaccessible to appeals for similar outlay at Bloomsbury, were notwithstanding the great gain of space obtained. By the separation of these collections, there was still urgent need of further accommodation for some of the departments. The Greek and Roman sculptures wanted space for proper arrangement. Relief was urgently demanded for the crowded state of the reading room. The department of manuscripts had no suitable room for readers consulting the select manuscripts used only under special supervision, and the department of prints and drawings had been waiting many years for space adapted to the growth of the collections and for their exhibition. All these wants were very pressing, and they were met more or less satisfactorily by the help of Mr. White's bequest. A gallery was built in connection with the Department of Greek and Roman Antiquities for the better display of the remains of the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, and an extensive building was erected on the south-eastern side of the museum, with front to Montague Street and with wings on each side connecting it with the main building. Within this new structure, a reading room for newspapers has been opened, and space has been found for the storage of the London journals and parliamentary papers. Working rooms and additional space for its collections have been provided for the Department of Manuscripts. The ceramic and glass collections have gained a well-lighted gallery, and the entire department of prints and drawings has obtained convenient accommodation within a large gallery for the exhibition of its treasures. The following is a list of